Welcome back. Continuing on with We Who Wrestle with God by Jordan Peterson. We're on to chapter 3, titled Cain, Abel, and Sacrifice. So, briefly for those unfamiliar, the Cain and Abel story, the story of the first murder, the first death, actually, a physical death in the biblical text in the book of Genesis. It's interesting that this is done through a murder, is the first death. Cain and Abel are also the firstborn humans. If you consider Adam and Eve being made, essentially not birthed. And Cain and Abel are offering sacrifices to the Lord of, first fruit sacrifices, agricultural, this farm-based sacrifice, animals and the like. Abel's sacrifice is seen as good and righteous to the Lord. Cain's not so much. And Cain brings less than ideal sacrifice. He doesn't bring the best that he has to offer. He brings subpar. And the Lord calls him out on that and lets him know that sin is crouching at the door and its desire is for him. And all Cain has to do is not let sin in, but instead he, out in the fields, decides to kill his brother. And that is the very quick summary. It's actually a very short story. It's all summed up in one, I believe, chapter 3, if I'm remembering that properly, of Scripture. Although now I'm doubting it and wondering if it's chapter 4, but I think it's chapter 3. But the point being, it's a very brief story, and I would encourage anyone who's listening to this to just give it a read. It is chapter 4. But, it's actually very short. I'm actually going to lead in by reading it. So you can skip ahead. This will maybe be a minute. Now, this is Genesis 4. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again, she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock, and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, Where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. So, that's the first 13 verses. And this is a long chapter. I mean, every chapter in this book is, but he goes for like 60 pages talking about this topic. So, as with previous chapters, there's subtext and subheadings, so we'll go into them heading by heading, more or less. So, just to get us started, chapter 3.1 is the identity of sacrifice and work, which you could do a whole video on, and I've kind of alluded to a lot of that in some of my Monday Musing videos. But the first note that I make is from philosopher of science Karl Popper, where he says, Our knowledge can only be finite, while our ignorance must necessarily be infinite. So why would I underline that? I think it's a helpful perspective. as we kind of enter into anything in general, but especially these old stories. We have to know, we know that our knowledge is finite. And the only way that couldn't be true is if you are confident there's nothing left to learn, which I can't imagine a person who would think that's true other than a complete state of delusion. So what it implies then is that your ignorance has no end, it's infinite. As far as you know, there's only more for you to not know, which is really interesting. And especially in the context of a text like this, where God is speaking to people. Well, he's also, if he's infinite, by definition, that means his knowledge is more. So, if you believe in a God that speaks to you, then by definition, that God would know more than you under all circumstances. So any recommendation or encouragement would be the correct route. I guess to some extent assuming beneficence versus malice in terms of the approach to you as a created being. The next quote I want to read is from P.K. Feyerabend, if I said that right, Austrian philosopher of science, where he notes, "Scientists try to eliminate their false theories. They try to let them die in their stead. The believer, whether animal or man, perishes with his false belief." The idea here being, if you're believing something wrong, you're better suited to let that belief die than for you to die with the belief. So this is important with Cain and Abel, and with mental health in general, because if you have a belief about the world or yourself that's not true, it will skew, and we'll talk about this more as we go on, it will skew your entire perception and understanding of reality. You will be misguided, off course. You will be in the wrong direction completely. So the quicker you can get rid of a false belief, both in action and thought, the better. Because when you die, you want to be free of those beliefs. And false beliefs lead you towards death. Literally sometimes, but also metaphorically. And so, scientists try to eliminate their false theories. They try to let them die in their stead. So you want what's false to die away from you, and instead continue to pursue truth. So I'm going to share the first paragraph that I want to read, and then elaborate with my first set of personal notes on this section of the reading. Something is always glimmering at the periphery, trying to make itself known, and what is greatest does so when we are most truly endeavoring to aim up. We can respond or turn away from the clarion call of opportunity, of adventure. If we reject the calling, however, the doorway disappears. If we make such turning away a practice, make of such rejection the sad spirit of our life, opportunity and adventure as such disappear, leaving behind the normality our refusal has rendered dull and pointless, stripped of its magic, disenchanted and hopeless. This is one pattern of egregious sin, one of the fundamental ways we divorce ourselves from the workings of what is truly redeeming within us and outside of us. If, by contrast, we respond, opportunity deepens and multiplies, until what is most profound and most truly inexhaustible makes itself manifest. This is precisely the pathway trodden by the greatest of scientists, mystics, saints, and artists. This is how God speaks from the depths of the true encounter with what flickers, flames, and lives. A more stripped back way that I might share this is, if there's an internal inclination towards something, pay attention. And you might not know where it's coming from or what truth it is. But if we take a moment of stillness and quietness, direction and input becomes more reality. So you might get answers that aren't helpful sometimes, which is why counsel is good. But this pause of what do I need right now? What's missing? What do I need to press into? You'll usually get an answer. The extrapolated note that I took here is that adventure, calling, destiny, opportunity, they all call upon us. Choosing to respond will only further us and only increase their calling. Ignoring them eventually leads them to stop beckoning us, instead leaving us to our infinitely underdeveloped normalcy. So when that voice, that call to adventure, and that call to truth hits you, respond. Respond to it. Pay attention to it. Act in accordance and with it. I think it's important because it might just stop calling. People talk about this with musings as well. You're called towards something creative. Some people say the universe, but in this context, talking religiously, you will say God. That if God calls you to something, sometimes it might be because there's a plan for your life, but other times it's because something needs done and you're a good fit. But if you deny that call and you say no, it's possible the opportunity will be passed on to someone else so that what the Lord wishes to have accomplished is still accomplished. You were the preferred vessel, but you did not answer the call. Your life still has meaning and purpose and direction, but you need to start listening. Because the more you harden your heart towards that voice, the more it stops speaking to you. Think of a friend or a romantic partner, and you're trying to get their attention and be loving and involving them and pulling them in, and they just say no over and over. You might eventually just stop reaching out and connecting to them. And the reverse is true, where if they keep saying yes and responding and engaging with you, you're probably going to increase your chances as well of doing more of that. A paragraph later, he says, if we take seriously what compels us or bothers us, that is, if we peer deeply enough into the abyss that lurks behind them, we will see and hear what we can tolerate of the Spirit of God making itself present to us. What does this mean? If you pay enough attention to anything, everything will be revealed. It's interesting, huh? That's reinforcing the point we just made. Pay attention to what compels you and what bothers you. If you pay enough attention to anything, everything will be revealed. Now, we might disagree with that, but the idea there is that truth is attainable, and the answer is attainable. And if you just make it your goal to seek it, and to die to self, and say, my hubris doesn't matter, my ego doesn't matter, I want to know, and I want to make changes I need to, those doors open up. The note I have is simple. Attend to what bothers and compels you, and your path will be made forward. Straightforward, all things considered. This is something interesting that came up in the next paragraph that I thought I would go into. Bear with me. Peterson states, he's referencing Jiminy Cricket here from the tale of Pinocchio. The cricket plays the role of the ladder. The ladder in this case being divine. The conscience for the marionette Pinocchio, who is aiming to become a real boy, impeded though he might be by the temptations of pride and arrogance, deceit and hedonism. The attention-getting chirp of the cricket is what bugs us. What sets off the cognitive equivalent of the primordial, parasite, and predator detection systems we refer to when we say something is really bugging me. Or, it really gets under my skin. We see shades of the plagues of flies and locusts that later bedeviled the intransigent and tyrannical, resentful, murderous, genocidal Pharaoh of the Exodus account. It is by no means coincidence that the diminutive companion of the puppet/boy, striving to realize himself, shares initials with the savior of the Christian tradition. My personal note is acknowledging what he said, Jiminy Cricket sharing the same initials, JC, with Jesus Christ. He's, I think, implying here that that's intentional. I don't know. But that Jiminy Cricket has also been used since at least 1803 as an expletive like Jesus Christ. People say that, like, oh, Jiminy Cricket. Not as common now. He is a bug. He literally bugs us, gets under our skin. You see the plague references here. But he also is calling us to attend to him, calling us to action. If you've read the Bone books, comic books, there is a little cricket type bug in that book as well. And I make a note that the cricket in Bone is also a still small voice that nags or incites curiosity in attending to it. So it's this interesting idea of this voice in the back of our mind that calls. And, if you track Jordan Peterson's stuff, we're technically talking about Cain and Abel right now, and he stretches stuff. I enjoy the depth, other people don't, and there's a limit to it, but this extrapolation, he's deep into archetypal work, so Tale of Pinocchio and a lot of Disney classics in that essence, and their original stories he's very into. Because they do speak a lot to the human experience and things going on. So, from there, we move into chapter 3, part 2, the hostile brothers of good and evil. Let's read this quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who is the author of the Gulag Archipelago, which is very long. It's about 2,300 pages. There's an abridged version of it that you can read, which is less than 1,000 pages. It's at least half the length, and the author approved it, which is really cool. So, it's always hit or miss with abridged versions where they shorten it, abridged meaning shorter. But the author gave the go-ahead on the abridged version, so, if you just want to test the waters of curiosity, you can read that one if you want the full depth of what he wrote, the 3-volume, 2,000-plus page version. He states that the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart, and through all human hearts. This line shifts. Inside us, it oscillates with the years, and even within hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained. Sorry, I was getting a little emotional even reading that, because it's very personal. Evil is not over there. It's not that group. It's not those people. It's not that thought. Evil takes place at the separation of self. So literally that metaphor of your heart, it has a potential for both. The others that we speak of are just as capable of good as they are evil. And who's to say they're right when we're wrong and we're right when they're wrong? We don't know. My note that I took months ago on Solzhenitsyn here was that good and evil is a singular decision by man. It is not a line drawn in countries, states, or families, but in each unique heart. It's really important. And just as a personal encouragement from a psychotherapeutic standpoint, you would do very well to recognize that all good and evil stems from you. You are that choice. You're that choice. If you're fighting evil in the world, it starts in your heart. And it starts in your interactions with everyone around you. It starts in your home. You branch out to solve these problems. If you are corrupt internally and all you're doing is yelling at other people to change what they're doing, you are perpetuating evil without realizing it usually. You have to correct what's internal. Get that in alignment. Every time you come across another human being, approach them with the goodness of your heart, not the evil. If you go home to a family, put your house in order, bring goodness to your home. Teach it to those who enter, teach it to your kids. Stretch it, stretch it, stretch it. Let it grow like a garden out of you. Don't just, don't project onto other people. You need to solve the issue internally first. So, I didn't have much other notes from that section. We're going to move on to 3.3, which I don't have any notes on, but I want to give you the title of it, which is The Sacred Patterning of the Political. It's a very short section, and frankly, I didn't have notes on it. And so, if you're reading along, you might have your own thoughts that you want to comment on, but it's only 2 pages. So I'm going into section 3.4, which I do have some notes on, titled The Good Shepherd as Archetypal Leader. So, I'm going to read this section. Which I think is... apologies for my delay. I'm trying to catch this. It's in quotes, but I don't see who quoted it. That's okay. We will read it. If I find the right man... Oh, this is talking about the eternal quandary of women. Again, I share the thoughts that I have in the moment, so if this feels a little chaotic, follow along. That's the point, right? Is that you're reading this as well, or you're just curious to hear my thoughts, which is fine, but know that they're not always for full audience. So, let me take a step back and read the whole paragraph. When properly integrated, the traits that might also predispose someone to callousness, uncaring, and even psychopathy can constitute the very basis for an implacable courage and strength. Women dispense with most men in their choice of partner because finding someone who optimally walks the line is very difficult. Not least because it is genuinely difficult, in fact, to walk it. The eternal quandary of women? Here's my main quote. If I find the right man, he will keep away the monsters. But if I get one who is too monstrous himself, then I am in trouble, even though he might be perversely sexy. He will be a monster to me as well as to others. And that is not a good plan. I need to find someone who is half monster and half kind. End quote. It is for this reason that the civilizable monster is arguably the prime character in both the romantic and pornographic fiction preferred by women. So, yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if you look at women's preference towards pornography as well as romantic fiction, it's things like billionaires, pirates, vampires, werewolves, it's something else, but these very powerful, monstrous people who have this line of they can be good, but they need to be tamed kind of thing. And we're generalizing here. This is archetypal in a lot of ways. But yeah, this idea, whether you believe this or not, talking about it, my note here is that the idea of being a controlled monster, one who can unleash but reserves it for protection of others from malicious monsters. So if you listen to Jordan Peterson talk, he brings that up as well as, people should be dangerous, people should be monsters but have themselves under control. My personal stance on that would be meekness, which is functionally meaning knowing how to use a sword but sheathing it. So the idea that, and on a small scale, it's the ability to speak your mind even if you're quiet. So I'm often a reserved person and don't speak as much, but I feel comfortable that I can say what I need to say when I need to say it. And I think that's what this is talking about. Can you throw down when you need to? Can you, for instance, can I kill someone coming into my home with the intent of harming me and my family? Can I comfortably end their life, even if I'd rather not, in protection of my wife? And does my wife believe that I will do that and can? And does she also believe that I would never do that to her? So that's this thing of, do people around me believe that I can step up aggressively in a state of protection and direction, while also trusting that I wouldn't do that to them? That's the balance I think he's pushing for. So, moving on to this next quote. This is even true if we are impulsive and immature, if we are governed, for example, by hedonistic whim. Such a whim is nothing but a short-term covenant. If I pursue this immediate desire in this particular way, I may obtain what I want. The hedonistic approach merely sacrifices to the short-term sequential gods of his whim, instead of to some higher order, or deeper psychological and social unity. Why sacrifice? At least because he allows himself to be pulled one way, here and now, rather than any of the many other ways that might clamor to do such pulling. Also because he offers up the integrated, responsible, and adventurous future self he might have been had he forgone his immaturity. To the pleasures of the moment, shades of Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, shades of Pinocchio and the slavish delinquents of Pleasure Island. My personal note, all action, both mature and immature, is a sacrifice of the future self and actions toward other desires, goals, and outcomes. So, what we pursue is the future. So every short-term decision, every immediate decision you make is a decision about the future. So, last quote in this section, which was, I read this a while ago, but it was apparently important to me because I starred it. So buckle up. This is about a paragraph later. This makes every hedonist polytheist, meaning believes in multiple gods, willing to invite in and to celebrate or worship, that is, to place at the pinnacle or make foundational, the diverse range of spirits corresponding to his or her momentary impulses and drives. All claims to the contrary, however, someone possessed by lust, anger, hunger, or envy is not the master of that ancient motivation or hierarchy of motivation, but its slave. The orgiastic and materialistic worshippers of the golden calf are hardly masters of their fate. If that makes sense. So, my note there. We all are slaves to a god, even if we frequently change allegiance in an attempt to pretend that we are not. This is the same idea that people communicate when they say, everyone worships something. People are like, I don't. And the idea there is what you have put as the highest thing in your life is what you worship. Whatever you make the most important. So the argument here is that not worshiping God mostly puts you in this polytheist thing where you just change what you worship constantly, which is why a lot of people lack a sense of self, because it's at the whim. What do you want at the moment? Well, what we want isn't always good and healthy, but if you put God at the center of decisions, or this deep philosophy at least at the center of your decisions, a lot of the times it doesn't matter what you want. You go with virtue and morality and what's correct in that perspective. But if you're basing it on you are changing, and you feel different on certain days. So you shift the goalpost of morality and the goalpost of aim. And so you're always aiming towards not just a moving target, but essentially a non-existing target. Like, that's a target today, but then tomorrow that's the target instead. And so you're just kind of flying around, and you're not really making a lot of moralistic progress. So that's just something to think about. Chapter 3.5, the sacrifice pleasing to God. Cain and Abel. Quote, one brother habitually offers to the world and God what is apparently required to maintain the optimal relationship with the earthly and the highest. The other cannot or refuses to do so, fails, shakes his fist at God in rage, and then kills the first, his very ideal. My note. Cain kills Abel, the representation of the, quote, ideal. He has a model for meeting God's standard, and instead of aspiring to ascend to that ideal, he kills it. We're kind of hitting the meat of this chapter here, which is Cain is given direction. His brother provides a good and pleasing offering. His brother puts the work in properly, and with the rewards of his work offers what is due to the Lord, his. And Cain does not. Cain brings a half-hearted sacrifice. He might say, I'm still sacrificing. I'm still putting effort in. Yes. You're not giving it your all. You're not giving it your best. And you know you're bringing something less than ideal. And in the presentation of Abel, Cain's brother, Cain has a benchmark, a goal. Do that. Look up to your brother and do what he does. And instead of aspiring to meet that goal, he kills the representation of it. This is the death of humanity. This is school shooting and infanticide of killing kids and taking innocence away. As we create our own ideal, we destroy beauty as a way to justify our evil shortcomings. This is very psychological and very prevalent, and we see it a lot. So, chapter 3.6, creatively possessed by the spirit of resentment. Quote, the divine indicates that it is instead his response to failure. Instead of noting his error, rectifying his ways, and improving the quality of his sacrifices, instead of confessing, repenting, and atoning, it might be said, Cain instead opens the door to something that both justifies and amplifies his rebellion and resentment. Again, this is what we're talking about. My thought from this comment is, Cain is opportuned to repent, to note his errors and rectify his quality. But instead he opened the door of justification towards his rebellion and resentment, allowing a hateful festering of self-righteousness. And when you have access to correction, if you read the book of Proverbs, it talks about this a lot. Wisdom is allowing wise counsel to correct and redirect you, and there's no wiser counsel than God. And this is also coming from this sense of, that inner voice that says, this is wrong, what you're doing. That voice will eventually, call it your conscience, it'll stop telling you you're wrong. That's why people say, well, my conscience is okay. Bluntly, you don't get to be the full decider of that. Because if you're not aiming to do good, you're just aiming to feel good, you will harden your heart to evil. So this is why if you're hurting someone consistently, and we've probably all bumped into this person that's just got no respect for, maybe service workers or retail workers or friends, partners, children, and they see nothing wrong with what they're doing, there's a chance that that voice that tells them what they're doing is wrong has just gone silent, because why bother anymore? Why would that voice bother to lead you in a good direction if all you ever do is ignore and disrespect its input? It's a gift to you, and you just say, no, I'm going to do my own thing anyway, despite how much destruction I leave in my wake. That is the Exodus story for Pharaoh. People struggle with that sometimes, where it says, the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. And what's happening there is God's giving Pharaoh a chance over and over to repent and release the Israelites. And he just says no. So the Lord isn't making his heart hard. He's giving Pharaoh over to his desire eventually. And saying, yeah, you know what? You consistently say no to me, so I'm removing myself from you. He removes the spirit from Pharaoh and removes maybe a level of divine input. Maybe removes giving him a chance. Because he has said no on purpose so many times, despite constant push from that inner voice and that conscience saying yes. This next quote is simple. Everyone has sufficient reason for evil. And I write that everyone can make excuses to be evil. It's just my way of saying it, but the way it's written here is just fine. Everyone has sufficient reason for evil. You can always justify evil. I was reading a book recently on spiritual disciplines, and I've been reading two, and I'm unfortunately mixing up who said what, but Dallas Willard's Spirit of the Disciplines and Richard Foster's Celebration of Discipline. One of them talks about ideology, and specifically that ideology at its core is a relatively evil thing, because it really just paints a justification for hatred. So if you have a belief system, or let's put it this way, if you have a hatred or you're angry at a certain type of person or a people group or some other system, that other thing, well, usually it's not necessarily ideology that's going to teach you that. You're going to have this hatred for some reason already. Maybe it was taught to you. Maybe you've got personal experience that causes problems. And then you find the ideology that gives that hatred permission. You find the ideology that says, this is okay. It's okay to hate. Hey, that thing that you hear that you need to work through, in this belief system, in this ideology, it's actually okay. In our ideology, it's okay to call people who disagree with you Nazis, because they're all the same, right? Or in this ideology, it's actually okay to say that there's a problem with people who aren't white, because it's justified in this situation. We find ways for our hate to be justified, our evil to be justified. Everyone can find sufficient reason for evil. You will find the philosophy that gives that permission, if that's what you're looking for. Because what you're looking for is justification for your shortcoming and your evil versus looking for the truth. And that's problematic. It's destructive. It's killed potentially more people than anything else. Just look at the 20th century. It's all ideological death. Communism being the worst culprit by a landslide, killing, 100 million people. Of course, things like Nazism in there as well. It's bad news. Couple paragraphs later, moving on. Quote, the imagery used to define the method of communication with the divine in the ancient story at hand is very concrete and archaic, according to the conventions of modern sensibility, and relies on a series of implicit metaphorical conventions or presumptions. Up is good compared with down. Down is demoralized, hunched, slumped. Down is downcast with fallen countenance. Down is dirt, dust, contamination, and multiplicity. Up is progress, compared with descent, compared with failure. Heaven is good, and progress. Heaven is up, in the unity of all integrated upward aim. The ultimate up is skyward. Thus heaven is skyward. God is the ultimate good. The ultimate good, God, therefore must reside in heaven. Smoke rises up. Smoke is essence, gist, or spirit. The entity residing in or characterizing the ultimate up can detect the quality of a sacrifice in the upward rising smoke. Finally, the offering that aims up most successfully is the complete and perfect investment that best pleases God. Yeah. My extrapolation. Up, so to speak, is highly characteristic of both the good and the potential. The potential of our existence, aim, and sacrifice. Up is good. Our countenance and stature reflect this as well. This version, if I'm doing this versus this up sense of, yes, I say that as someone who has a very seemingly downcast in way of thinking when I do this with my face, and I focus in because I'm deep in thought. That's what I do with my eyebrows. But this aim, both manifesting in thought, action, and demeanor, how we're present. I'm relaxed into comfort, this simplicity of aiming up with my body language. Just interesting. The idea of communicating with the divine is often this consistent aim upward. So, continuing on a couple sentences later on the new paragraph. Why might heaven be up? Because the sky is beyond us, and therefore representative of what is eternally beyond. Because up is the proper aim, as opposed metaphorically to down, because we, quote, look up to people we admire, thus constituting their character as our eventual aim. Because if we look down, we can see only what we are standing on and not where we are going. Because to, quote, look down on is to be contemptuous of. Because contemplation of the heavens, to which we might raise our eyes, inspires awe and the desire to imitate, because we can come to be what we imitate most devoutly. And because we can, in truth, navigate by the position of the heavenly bodies. As linguist and philosopher George Lakoff notes, Up is good. Up is good is an image, schema, that is based on a universal human experience of being upright, vertical, and oriented towards the sky. The metaphorical entailments of the image, schema, are highly systemized and can be observed in a wide variety of domains. It is a pervasive, deep-seated, and highly conventionalized metaphor in our language and thought. Yeah. And as we're going, I encourage anyone listening for the engagement, thoughts as we proceed, both on the book and these comments going forward, because I'm not reading this with anyone. And the discussion is always lively when I get to have it and joyful, and one that I get excited for. It's fun to share experience with others. So continuing on. In this quote, where does this pull from? We'll find out right now. Should have kept my quotation mark, reference page marked. Oh yeah, Mircea Eliade, book Shamanism. Talking about cosmic trees. Jumping around. The tree is often considered to be the ladder that connects the three levels of the cosmos: the underworld, the earth, and the sky. I think we see this a lot with the Yggdrasil in Nordic mythology, but tree of life being this central theme in a lot of places where roots go into the underground, the underworld, and the tree itself is this tangible reality. We can touch the trunk. It's the earth, so to speak, and then the branches go up into the heavens, into the sky. A tree is unbelievably metaphorical, and we see this, of course, in the Genesis story of creation and the fall. But there's a ton of symbolism with trees cross-culturally and even just personally. We use it all the time in metaphors and references, and people love trees. So we're deeply connected with trees. Very much so. Continuing on. It is in establishing this relationship between talent, opportunity, and responsibility that God ensures the maintenance of the eternal balance of justice. This is the meaning of the analogous warning, for unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall much be required. Luke 12:48. The level of sacrifice demanded by the divine is proportionate to the degree of privilege awarded, however apparently arbitrarily to the fortunate or withheld from the lowly. Cain's great and archetypal sin is therefore best understood as his holding back, his hiding of his God-given light under a bushel, his putting it in a secret place, Luke 11:33. His failing to offer his best. This is not good. As far as God is concerned, not acceptable to God. But it is also neither acceptable to nor good for Cain, or, as it turns out, for Abel, for God, for the descendants of Cain, or for the whole human race, insofar as those who compose it are tempted by the same spirit and beckoned at the murderous brother's door. My thought. Luke 12:48. Much is given, much is required. Our sacrifice to God may triangulate in our talent, opportunity, and responsibility. Privilege awarded implies level of sacrifice needed. This is important to me. So something to look at here. Opportunity, talent, and responsibility. So what are your natural talents? What are you good at? Or what have you stewarded to be good at? What opportunities do you have to use that? And then do you have a responsibility for how that's engaged in the world around you? And then that is now the proportionate usage of said talent, said opportunity. Like who you are and what you sacrifice is relative. You know, people have different things that they're good at and different resources and different ways that they can use their self. So use it, step into it, honor it, so to speak, joyfully. But yours is yours, and your sacrifice is relative to you and your talents and opportunities and the responsibility you are given. aim up and offer all that you have, is the final quote from that section. So we're moving on. Section 3.7, humility and faith versus pride, despair, and vengeful anger. So I highlighted here the words calling and conscience as we head into this paragraph. Calling and conscience. So this can be most prosaically and reductively understood as the attempt to balance the requirements, the needs and wants, of the present, which appear as immediate desire, with the more abstract but also vital reality of the future. This means, quote, do not do anything today in the grip of your impulse that will compromise tomorrow, or next week, month, or year. Alternatively, although there is in fact no difference between the two, do not compromise your social relations, given how badly you are outnumbered by prioritizing the necessities of the moment. Functionally, aim up and offer all that you have. Calling and conscience are the primary messengers of God. And my apologies, I want to backstep a little bit because I did have a note from the previous page that was when I turned my personal pages I found, which is that withholding our best is only bad. Withholding our best is only bad. It's never good to withhold the best of you. It benefits none and steals from all. Steals from us, God, our brothers, our neighbor, our descendants, and our human race. We are called on to offer everything we have. Self-sacrificial. It doesn't mean self-destructive, and it doesn't mean dismissing your value and worth. But it does mean that all that you have is now an offering. And the more that you steward and train what you have, the more you have to offer. Congrats. All right, I love this next section and marked it up like crazy. So we'll see the type of thoughts that I can offer. But I want to give one final thought, notes from the previous passage that I wrote, which is, do not jeopardize tomorrow for today. Do not compromise social relations for the necessities of the moment. Now this I'm still thinking on. I just want to offer this out. I just asked the question, but to what extent? I wonder what extent. You know, social relations are good, but the necessities of the moment, when does that overlap happen? And you can be called on way too much, especially if you're great socially. And you're needed socially by a lot of people. Where do you draw the line? So, just a reflective thought. I'm heading on to this section that I'm marked up like a maniac. Abel's sacrifices are met with praise, while Cain's are not. Cain gets nowhere in his life, not because God or the world was arbitrary, but because his sacrifices are insufficient. This is an insistence that echoes the divine prohibition against consuming the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The insistence that there is an implicit moral order, the suffusing of the whole of the being, in becoming with the creative spirit that is its originator and continuer. It is not up to man or woman to usurp the right to create that moral order, or to attempt to circumvent its strictures pridefully, or in a Machiavellian or otherwise a manipulative and false manner. Instead, we are built, so to speak, to honor and reflect that order, to adapt to it, to interpret signs of failure, not as insufficiency on the part of the cosmos and its creator, but as evidence of personal insufficiency, to strive such that only what is best is offered, and, if that is not good enough, to search for something better yet. Cain rejects all of that personal responsibility, attempting instead to shape the entire world in the image of his inadequacy. Pretty intense, huh? It's a very powerful statement. My summarized note is that life and God are good, and that this is a moral requirement to believe, no matter what. Thus, the responsibility to bear our cross at any cost is necessary to maintain this truth. So that's the kind of idea that he's promoting here is that you have to maintain that belief, or we then start to shape the world around our own belief and understanding. As it said here, Cain is attempting instead to shape the entire world in the image of his inadequacy. So the idea is if we're shaping the world after what we just think and how we feel, well, we acknowledged earlier that our knowledge is finite, but our ignorance is infinite. So if we shape the world after just us, we are then saying, I'm okay shaping the world in large part off of untruths and things that I don't know, and then demanding that the world around me succumbs and moves down to the level of my stupidity and ignorance and immoralism. And we for sure all do this. I mean, even someone who's, like, I'm not saying that now if you just believe in the Bible, you're devoid of that. What I'm saying is, it's weighty to think that you have the answers and to think that you can just figure out your own moral order, because eventually it's going to break down where people aren't going to agree with that. They're going to want their own moral order, or their subjective morality is going to say, according to their belief system, their morality, and their ideology, you should be dead, or you should be subservient to them. And this gets dangerous. Not that religion can't get dangerous by any means. The point being is what are we doing as the conversation goes with belief system here? So, what are we doing? Okay. Continuing. And we're moving towards an end here. It is therefore the deepest of moral requirements to hold life in God to be good no matter what. No matter what. This is a terrible truth, and there are no circumstances under which failure to do so can be redefined as success, which we talked about just a moment ago. It is much better, even under conditions of extreme and apparently unjust suffering, to reaffirm our commitment to life more abundant and to undergo the changes necessary to bear a terrible cross. I think we could talk for a long time on this, but I do believe in the importance of valuing and pushing life forward at all costs when we can. All right. This is another one that stood out to me a lot, that I starred both the comments personal and textual. So first, let me read the whole paragraph because there's a build-up. God nonetheless puts his faithful son, so to speak, to a severe test, handing him over to Satan to torture, wagering with the devil that Job will not lose faith. So we're talking about Job here, which if you haven't read that, we won't go into it now, but a lot of unjust suffering happening in Job. This is a decision that at least seems profoundly unfair, to say the least. How then is this terrible story to be understood? Existentially, if not theologically. Here's where my main quote comes in that I appreciated. First, it is clearly the case that the innocent suffer, and often worse than the guilty, who are at least relieved in the deepest sense by the fact of their punishment, as Dostoevsky was at pains to establish in the case of Raskolnikov, once again, in Crime and Punishment. The fact of the undeserved suffering is one of the existential truths that makes life itself appear, if not utterly unbearable, then at least unjustifiable. Its reality is so profound that it is a central theme of Christ's incarnation. That's the one that stood out to me a lot. My personal note is that the reality of unjust suffering is so real to the human experience that it manifests in the incarnation and crucifixion of Christ. So, people out there kind of preaching that all you have to do is believe in God and you'll have a good life. No, what the reality is there is your belief systems shape what happens inside and how you bear with suffering. Now, having a safe and healthy belief system can help maybe steer you away from unnecessary suffering. It can teach you wisdom. Maybe don't put yourself in these situations. This is how you navigate a difficult relationship and maybe help it to thrive instead of be destructive. So, yeah, your belief systems and how you approach life can dramatically change how joyful and good life is, and how successful you might be. But there's nothing you can do that just guarantees elimination of suffering. It's part of the human experience, potentially. And maybe you'll be fortunate and not deal with a lot. And maybe you'll be like Job and do everything right and experience it to an unbearable level. Not the point of this, though. The point is internal alignment with what is right and true. Continuing on. The insistence of Job is that the properly faithful human being retains his upward aim and devotion, no matter what. Those are dread words indeed. But it is that insistence that enables Job to regain his feet and to prevail once again, even to do better after the cataclysm. The book of Job actually ends with him having a better life than he had before his suffering started. Spoiler alert. So that's what's being implied there. I just wrote that a properly faithful servant continues his faithful aim to the Lord no matter the circumstance, no matter the suffering. A few paragraphs later we read, the emphasis on desire, this is talking about Cain in Genesis 4:7, which I'll read that part. If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. Genesis 4:7. Good derailment there, an eyelash in my mouth. The actual quote that I was wanting to pull from after the Genesis quote was that the emphasis on desire is telling, as is the imagery of the doorstep, combined with the necessity of an invitation to enter, submission to the will of God as an alternative, and the insistence that mastery of such temptation is both necessary and possible. That's important. That the way that this is worded implies that the evil temptation that approaches you can be beaten. You can master it. You can master the temptation of sin, is the implication. Doesn't mean you're not tempted and that it's not difficult, but you can overcome. It's possible. It's interesting, huh? Cool and encouraging, but also scary. Moving on to section 3.8, which might be the last one. Oh my goodness, final section. We're in the home stretch. Section 3.8, titled Fratricide, Then Worse. Oh, and I did this in the last video. Sorry that we're an hour in. I'm only doing this now. This quote comes from page 144 at the bottom. If you're following along, my apologies for the past hour. Quote, this is an outline of the causal pathway not only to the corruption of the soul, but to the degeneration of the state itself, as well as the technology upon which the state hypothetically depends and certainly utilizes. First, the individual fails to make the proper sacrifices. Second, he lies about it in a self-serving manner. Third, he nurses his bitterness, alienating himself from the divine, purposely, working himself overtime into a self-righteous fit, collaborating with the spirit of sin. And then he destroys his own ideal to obliterate the terrible judge and to wreak vengeance upon the spirit of the cosmic order. Then his descendants disseminate that pattern of destructiveness throughout all of society until every last man and woman is irredeemably corrupt. And all of that stemming from the original failure to work in earnest and gratefully, and do so while turning to the inappropriate worship of technological prowess. Then absolutely everything collapses in catastrophe. It is no coincidence whatsoever that the cataclysmic twinned stories of the flood and the collapse of the Tower of the Faithless, presumptuous and authoritarian state, follows on the heels of the terrible tale of the hostile brothers. The unerring eye for an edit that managed exactly the sequencing. This sequencing is a profound, even miraculous indication of the genius of the collective unconscious or divine hand that penned and assembled the text. My brief thought is that I just want to study this outline more and consider it and how he describes it. But essentially that the sinful generational path towards destruction is what's being discussed here. So that as we start letting these little moments of sin in, if we don't check them or correct them, we actually then perpetuate them generationally towards societal destruction is the idea. So, yeah. Page 151, halfway down. Started the paragraph here. Alternatively, and more poetically, those who come to lie also engage in the worship of false idols, something akin to Cain's openness to possession by and collusion with the Luciferian spirit. The misattribution of value, something that becomes automatized when practiced, becomes habit, becomes character itself, means that the world is now subdued in a false order, named with the wrong names, such that nothing ends up in its proper place, and that things of less value are given priority over those greater. How could it be otherwise, in the case of the lie, which is by definition the falsification of the real? Of course, judgment becomes profoundly impaired when everything has been valued improperly, particularly when that has become a habit so deeply ingrained through practice that it becomes true of perception itself. My rather long note here is that lying leads to a warped reality, one of worshiping false idols. We misattribute value and view the world under a false order. Unimportant things become more highly placed than that which is more important and valuable. Pharaoh is an example of self-destruction through the insistence on lies and lying. By doubling down on falsities, even at times when we truly know that we are wrong. So, the last section here that I marked is brief. Page 153, halfway down at the end of the paragraph. Better tools when the aim is wrong merely means more rapid movement down the wrong road or toward the wrong up. And my final note there is that better tools are only useful in better hands. The foundation of the person is more important. Good tools in bad hands just leads to quicker destruction. Yes. So, point being with all this, there's a lot to glean from Cain and Abel. At least an hour and 2 minutes worth of time of recording. Current state. Yeah, this keep you thinking for hours, and obviously, I don't know how many dozens of hours this dude's been thinking about it and writing about it, but it's heavy. So read the story if you haven't and consider it, and if you're actively working your way through We Who Wrestle with God, let me know. Rest of the book's still coming. We'll move on to chapter 4 soon on Noah. But yeah, if you're tracking, leave me thoughts, comments. I want to engage. So yeah, we'll see you soon for chapter 4. Thanks. See y'all.